Everyone, thank you for tuning in today. I'm going to be sharing with you a book that I've been reading for the past several months. Why did I sound like I was saying months? I don't know. Anyway, the past several weeks, and it's by the author Luisah Teish, and it's called Jambalaya, the Natural Woman's Book of Personal Charms and Practical Rituals. This is by far one of my most favorite books that I see myself referring to occasionally. And when I first got this book, I was really happy that I did, because it came in a point in my life where I was really questioning a lot of things from a spiritual perspective. And when you're developing spiritually and developing your intuition, a lot of things are just going to seem so out of place to you. You're going to go back to a lot of memories, at least for me in my childhood. This book really brought back a lot of questions that I've had and kind of helped me answer them for myself. The first chapter, which is called Growing Up Tipsy, and there is kind of a little introduction, some poems and whatnot, which is one of my favorite things about this book. I prefer mostly books that I can reference, that I can look up and refer to, and this book kind of has that feeling, as well as a storybook as well, which the author Luisah Teish is very good for, to just give you kind of that history and background history as to some of her experiences and how it correlates to her spiritual experience. So for me, this book is a storybook, while also a reference book that I can refer to for any rituals, spells, or any other thing that I may not be too sure about, and just may need to reference the book again to just reconfirm. But the first chapter, as I was mentioning, Growing Up Tipsy, was very reminiscent of my childhood and growing up in Brooklyn, with so many different type of women. And I tell you, all types of women, not only just from the aspect of race, mostly Latin, Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean, Chinese, Indian. I was exposed to a beautiful array and rainbow of women, and white women as well. And it is just interesting how no matter what is your background, as women, we all have our own histories and stories with magic and so forth, and the power that we have within us individually and collectively as well. So growing up in that background and knowing so many different sort of women, it just kind of, being older now, and I will be 31 now in 2016, I just look back and see all of the struggles and all of the sacrifices that these women made. And it all goes back to growing up tipsy. Having these whispers of magic, medicine women, women who had remedies, all sorts of just folklore magic, even though some of them were limited to some religious ideologies. At least for me, for example, I grew up in a mostly Jehovah's Witness household. But again, I was exposed to a lot of different cultures and backgrounds. So I didn't have that kind of narrow mindset as far as, just sticking to one ideal, because the world was just so curious to me, and I just couldn't sit still at church and just listen to a sermon. I needed to have kind of more of an interactive spiritual experience. But that was me as a child, growing up, again, having that restrictive kind of way of upbringing, always kept things kind of in a secretive manner, as far as, a remedy for this, or a remedy for that, or whatever the case. There was always a reference back to nature and the natural elements that surrounds us. So I really didn't see that as something acceptable within the religious mind frame and framework that I was being brought up in. So this book brings back, especially with Luisah's telling of her growing up, and she is originally from New Orleans, Louisiana. So of course there is that very strong background of hoodoo, and so forth. So she did have that kind of experience, and I always see it kind of mirrored with mine as well. Of course, you don't have that rich background and culture of Louisiana, but still there exists that same framework of restrictiveness and kind of narrow mind frame as to what is spirituality and the woman's natural magic. Unfortunately, media and the mainstream acceptance of what is a witch or a medicine woman has been significantly demonized and associated with so many negative connotations that people just completely shut down and want nothing to do with it, because for some odd reason, not really an odd reason, there's definitely a very strong historical and psychological background behind this fear of spirituality. But just to kind of put that in the back burner for a second, I think that that fear is just something of irresponsibility. I say that because once you know and know where you come from and know who you are and what you're meant to do on this earth, you start to understand that you have to take responsibility for your spirituality. You start to realize that there is nothing out there that is going to save you other than yourself. So, you know, just learning about that and just kind of bringing that to the forefront as to who I am becoming, and who I was, of course, is all basically in this book. Now, this is not a groundbreaking book, or you know, where you'll find, you know, all groundbreaking information, because for me it was just kind of revisiting and understanding that there are other people that are experiencing what, you know, what I may be experiencing. Coming from a Caribbean, Latin, Afro-Cuban, Afro-Dominican background, and I'm sure there's so much other backgrounds to me, but for now that's just what I know. We just had so many interesting sort of superstitions or sort of rituals. I want to say that I've had many spiritual experiences as growing up, but just one that sticks out to me and resonates with me to this day is one where my mother had a teacup, her fortune read in a teacup, and in Spanish that's known as la taza. And the lady, it was just kind of a joke. The woman was a lady from my building growing up in Brooklyn, and she had her own kind of intuition. One day all the women were just kind of talking and joking around, and unexpectedly a message was brought to my mother about her being able to get married in the future, as well as have a son. Now at the time it was just my sister and I. My mom was single. You know, there was no indication that my mom would be getting married or meeting someone, or let alone having a little brother on the way. So we kind of blew that off, but I can kind of, now that in hindsight, I can kind of feel the energy of like, oh really, you know? So, and what's really important about this story that sticks out to me, that the person who did it would be someone that you would say, oh, she doesn't have power. Like, how does she know anything about fortune telling or anything like that? You know, it would blow her off. That's just not something. But in the years that I've been exposed to this sort of knowledge, I've seen that the most people that you may disregard as not being conscious or having tattoos here or whatever, or I've known strippers that are more conscious than people who attend the daily church. But you see, you can't judge a person by the way they live or how they live their life. You have to really respect their spirit, their guides, their intuition, their gifts from God, which each and every one of us have individually. So So remembering that, you would never think that this woman would have that power. But 20 something years later, my brother is here. My mother did get married, and my brother did come to fruition. So whatever the case may have been, that was written on the walls, as they say. The writings are on the walls. It's written in the stars. It's just, we have to open our intuition and be receptive to that energy and message that surrounds us. So reading this book brought me back to that memory as a child, and a lot of other memories that I've had as a child, as far as spirituality and understanding who I am and where I come from. A very important point that Luisah brings in this book is again, as I was mentioning, the demonization of spirituality and knowing who you are. I feel that there's a very, very big hypocrisy when it comes to that, at least for my personal experience. And I'll just give you an example. Anything that is African or black based is, again, demonized. But any other culture or religion or any other following is acceptable. Let's say, for example, the Chinese culture. They're very big on respecting their ancestors. And it's something known as Ancestor Veneration, where you don't worship your ancestors, but you give them honor and respect. The same concept exists in the African culture or the black culture, whether it be Voodoo, Hoodoo, or Santeria, or whatever the case. It's the same concept of ancestor reverence, earth-based religion. So, when you go into a nail salon, I see a lot of the hypocrisy, at least with the people around me and my community, where it's accepted. They go into the salon and have their nails done into the Chinese salon. But it's not the fact that it's a Chinese salon, but it's a fact that in most of these places, that even not only a salon, but even where we eat, you see a altar for their either ancestor or a deity to help them bring luck or prosperity or whatever the case. And no one seems to even notice it or even have a problem with it. I honestly don't have a problem with it. But the problem that I have is that if I have a small altar in my home, or an image of a deity, of an African deity, for example, it is frowned upon. People are like, oh, that's voodoo. I'm scared. I'm afraid. It's very disheartening to me, and it can be very frustrating sometimes, because there's a lot of ignorance, and with ignorance comes a lot of misinformation. With this misinformation, we are usually shut out and shut down of our own powers and information that pertains to us, our ancestors, our background, who we come from, who we are. And so it's just a very hypocritical thing that I see happening on a widespread basis. It's like Luisah mentions in the book, and also in her lectures, that it's kind of just universal, a universal demonization of just African and black based religions. So that is just something that, again, with this book, struck a chord with me, because it's something that I deal with on a personal basis with family and friends and just people that I know or just come across, and they have questions about these things. And once you do mention anything that has to do or related with your spiritual beliefs, being African or black based is just completely shut down. So that's just something that I wanted to mention, and really appreciate Luisah bringing to the forefront, and just helping us understand, what it is that is so wrong with, knowing who you are and where you come from. But again, that comes from, the slave trade, just making sure that all the memories of who we are and where we come from is completely abolished. So with that said, going a little bit further into the book, as I was mentioning, some of the features of this book, not only is it kind of a storytelling of Luisah's childhood and upbringing, but also very useful as far as reference to help you you know, recognize your ancestors, cleanse your aura, cleanse your home, have spiritual practices for you on a personal and day-to-day basis. So here you have rituals for personal power as far as money, ancestor reverence, as I mentioned. Just kind of a brief breakdown of African deities, just some of their natural attributions and their actual European equivalent, which again, this is a universal teaching. One aspect or theology that you may have of one religion exists in another as well, from another culture as well. So again, versatility and just making sure that you do your research and understand, you know, the information that you are researching and how it relates to you and your surroundings as well. So yeah, so definitely a book that I recommend, Jambalaya, The Natural Woman's Book of Personal Charms and Practical Rituals by Luisah Teish. Make sure you also check her out on YouTube. She is phenomenal, a wonderful woman, and someone who inspires me on a day-to-day basis. And I hope that one day I do have the opportunity to meet her in this lifetime. But I definitely recommend it. I picked this up on Amazon. I think it was about $12 to $14. Got it on Amazon Prime and got it in 2 days. And I still go through it. I still haven't even finished it because every time I go to one thing, I always end up having to research that aspect, being it just one word or a sentence. It just delves me into one research aspect, into another, which I love because it just keeps things fresh and keeps me intrigued. So definitely my style of reading and preference as far as books are concerned. So I want to thank you all for tuning in today. Make sure that you visit the link info bar down below for more links to the blog and my Instagram accounts, as well as to link to Amazon to purchase this book as well. So make sure that you do your research, stay conscious, and stay aware of who you are and where you come from, and don't let anyone tell you any different. So that is all for today. Again, make sure that you do visit the info bar below and visit at hellknowsforbeauty.com for more beauty and spiritual rituals for you. Bye-bye.